A good understanding of how the Wisconsin Supreme Court's Office of Lawyer Regulation works is a must for lawyers, especially solo practitioners and small firm lawyers. Hello, I'm Jeff M. Brown, a legal writer with the State Bar of Wisconsin, and with me today is Judge Tim Samuelson, Director of the Office of Lawyer Regulation, or OLR, as it's commonly referred to. Judge Samuelson will be a presenter at the State Bar's annual Sullivan Small Firm Conference, which is scheduled to take place on October 27th to 29 at Kalahari Resort in Wisconsin Dells, with a virtual replay on November 14th through 16th. Welcome, Judge Samuelson.
Thanks for having me, Jeff.
Judge, what's one thing you think would surprise most lawyers about the Office of Lawyer Regulation and how it works?
One statistic that people aren't always aware of is that over 90% of OLR grievances are closed at our intake preliminary evaluation stage. So the overwhelming majority of the matters that are directed to our office ultimately are resolved without investigation and without discipline. Not enough people know that.
Yeah, that's a big number. I, for instance, thought it would have been more than half, but I didn't think it would be that high. If an OLR grievance has been filed against me, what's the most important thing I should do or keep in mind?
I would recommend preparing for an initial discussion with OLR's intake staff and treating it like you would an important court hearing or client conference. And by that, I mean prepare. Have your documents and papers in front of you, perhaps outline some of the things that you want to highlight, but give it time, give it thought, and prepare. Have documents, dates, times, records of calls, of discussions, of the actions that you've taken, so you're not leaving it to guesswork. That way, when you discuss with intake, you'll sound prepared, you'll be polished, and you'll be prepared to answer any questions that may come about.
And it's from your answer, it's clear that one has to have good record keeping and a lot of stuff on the front end to be able to do that on the back end.
Yes, that's something we strongly recommend. And in fact, just last week I presented at a Pinnacle series. So here's a plug for that. With several others, including Aviva Kaiser, Tim Pierce, Chris Shattuck, and Dean Dietrich, about some of the practice management tips that can really help practitioners avoid seeing me and my colleagues at OLR.
Right, because I can foresee a situation where maybe I haven't taken advantage of some of those practice tips. I have the information you're mentioning gathering in response to a complaint, but I don't necessarily know where it is. I can't lay my hands on it very quickly, and consequently, I'm not going to be as prepared for that initial meeting, and that may lead people to believe that maybe there's something more to the complaint than there actually is.
Right, and that's the reason it makes sense to take time, consider what your response might be, and gather your documents to ensure that you're ready to give a complete, prepared, polished response.
Would you preview for us your talk at the Sullivan Small Firm Conference?
Sure, Jeff. One of the common complaints or statements that I've received in engaging with lawyers across the state is that OLR is a black box. Folks don't know what we do or how we do it. And so what I'm going to do is focus a lot on our procedure. I'll start by walking people through some of our statistics, a couple of which I've touched on today. The numbers, who makes grievances, what types of practices are at an increased risk or more likely to receive grievances, and then how do we proceed? What does the intake process at OLR look like? What does our formal investigative process look like? And how do disciplinary litigation matters proceed? So I'll discuss all of those. I'll talk about the lawyer regulation system in general, because it's much more than just OLR. But what I'm trying to do is explain what we do, how we do it, and demystify the process. And throughout the presentation, I'm happy to take questions and try to be as responsive as I possibly can to the solo and small firm practitioners.
Judge, you have a wide and varied background in the law. You've done government work both with the State Department of Justice and as an assistant U.S. attorney. you've been in private practice, you've been a state court judge. So you talked about different practice areas that may be more or less likely to get grievances against them. Can you talk a little bit about how one's practice area impacts their relationship with OLR in the grievance process?
Sure. One of the things I'll talk about in the presentation is some specific numbers, some statistics, and they come right out of our annual report. And we get about 45% of the grievances involve criminal law. The overwhelming majority of those are directed towards defense lawyers. There are some for prosecutors, but again, the overwhelming majority, we don't have a breakdown between prosecution and defense, but fair to say that the overwhelming majority is for defense lawyers. The second most common practice area that we see is family law, and that's about 17% ballpark, 16 to 18%, depending on the year. So the two of those practice areas are nearly 2/3 of what we see. And those practice areas also are more prevalent in the small and solo firm practice area, or at least that's my assumption based on what I've seen over the past 14 months. One of the things that I'll be pretty blunt about telling people is my background, although I think it's pretty broad, and I like to think of it as I've represented plaintiffs and defendants, I've prosecuted cases, I've written criminal appeals, I've tried civil cases in several states, and state and federal court. As a trial court judge, I've presided over civil, criminal, and family law matters. However, I've never represented a person accused of a crime. I've never represented parties in a challenging family law dispute. So I'm not so presumptuous to think that I've seen it all, but the way I like to think about it is my background gives me a context for the types of things that I see every day at OLR. And I look forward to discussing that with members of this solo and small firm practice area.
Well, there's going to be a lot there for those members to take away from your talk, and I look forward to hearing it as well. And we will see you at Kalahari later this month. Thank you for the time today, Judge.
Thank you, Jeff, and thanks for the opportunity. I'm looking forward to meeting so many of my colleagues throughout the state.